I've decided to take a break this Sunday. We've been talking about grace. Been talking about grace, I think, since January. Been talking about the book of Romans. A message began to stir up in my heart over the last week. And the message comes down to this basic truth about what it means to be human. And the message is this: a hero must take the journey. You see, the thing is that we all want to be heroes. We all, in our sense, in our world, whatever we're dealing with, whatever we're coping with, whatever struggles or challenges, whatever, we want to walk into that situation and be the hero. You got a new job, your boss comes in and does some training. What do you want to prove to your boss? You have what it takes. You're the hero. You're in control. You can do the job. Why? Because you don't want to lose the job. With your kids, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to portray? You're in control. You're in power. You have authority. You know what you're doing. You want to be the hero of that situation. You may not want to dress up in tights with a flag, an American eagle, and the underwear on the outside, but you want to be a hero in the world that you live in. The interesting thing about literature, and I do write on the side, and as a writer, I'm often creating fictional characters who want to be heroes. The interesting thing when you deal with literature and when you deal with the hero, the first thing you have to understand as a writer is this: the hero is the weakest person in the room. Some of us think, when we think of hero, right, we think of the strongest, the most powerful, can overcome anything, can do anything. But actually, if you are a writer and you're working in literature and the idea of hero comes from literature, comes from story, the hero is actually the weakest person in the room. Let's deal with Star Wars. We deal with Luke Skywalker in episode 4. When you meet Luke Skywalker, he doesn't have it together, right? Because what he has before him is a hero's journey. So he starts off as the weakest character. And as the weakest character, he has no real idea. He knows there's an empire out there and there's a resistance and there's, his dad was a part of it, but he is actually clueless. So as the weakest character, he has no real knowledge of who he is or what's going out there. So who shows up to tell him what's really happening in the world? Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan Kenobi has to impart that information to him. So he there, being weak, being lacking in knowledge, receives that. But after that, what has to happen next? He then has to be trained. Why does he have to be trained by Obi-Wan Kenobi? Right? Obi-Wan hands him the lightsaber and he looks at it and then he turns it on and he says, I will train you in the way of the Force. But why? Why? Because Luke doesn't know how to be a Jedi. Why? Because he's the weakest person. Then he meets some friends along the way. And the way it works in a good story is you meet the friends along the way. They usually have a skill or an ability or a relationship with someone that can empower you and give you strength so that you can move on to the next step. And now, where is Luke going as a hero? So he gets knowledge, and then he gets training, and then he gets friends who are going to support and help him. And then he's going to look and he's going to see the big bad guy, Darth Vader. We all know Darth Vader. He's the guy that Luke has to take on. But then there's one other step. Luke has to come up, and they talk about it, the cave, and in the cave he has to face his darkest and his most powerful enemy before he faces Darth Vader. And at that point he usually fails. He usually tries and he fails. Remember the second movie with Luke Skywalker? He goes up before Darth Vader. Darth Vader cuts off his hand, goes flying off, and he fails. And then he's ready to be a hero. The most boring trilogy in the world would have been Luke Skywalker in the very beginning, who shows up, already a Jedi Knight master, can take on the Emperor, walks up, 5 minutes into the movie, takes out his lightsaber, kills the Emperor Palpatine, and it's done. The end. Who wants to watch that story? Why? Because to be a hero, you have to have the journey. And I've recognized in myself, and I think a number of us struggle with this. We want to be a hero without the journey. We want to have the looks. We want to have the influence. We want to have the knowledge. We want to have the ability. We want to show up. Let's be honest. We want to be able to put on the facade, but not have to make the sacrifice to get there. But the true definition of a hero is you have to go through the journey to get there. And that is what the Bible is filled with. Think of all the characters. Do they all start strong? Most of them start weak. Moses started weak. David started weak. They all start weak. They all start down here, and they have to go through trial after trial after trial until they get to this place that God is ready to use them. That's the story of the Bible. That's the story of us. The truth is if you want to be a hero without the journey, then we do not understand what it means to be Christian. There's a book, and I mentioned it to you guys last week. It's called The Way of the Dragon and the Way of the Lamb. And they're working through this idea of what it means to be weak in the eyes of God and how God uses our weakness. And the writers reflect on this idea of weakness, and they say, rather than viewing our strengths as the path to a meaningful and powerful life, James was calling us to view our weakness as the path of our calling. So the authors have interviewed an individual, and they're referring to him as James, and they go on to write, seeking to live empowered by our strengths was, in his mind, a holy, unchristian way to live. The Christian way of life is living in dependence upon God. Moving forward to embrace our weaknesses so that God's glory might be revealed. This has obvious implications for how we think about ministry and calling, but it also impacts our understanding of what it means to be a human being. On this understanding of life, part of what it means to mature as a person is to accept our weakness, and I love this, and abide within it. Just you're weak, you don't know, you don't have all the information, you're not a Jedi Knight, you're not the most perfect mother, you're not the most perfect coworker, but you just kind of settle in that and you just say, okay, I'm not there. And I know I'm not there. This does not mean we reject a genuine God-given strengths and abilities. We are called to steward these things. If you are good with numbers, pursuing a career as a CPA may indeed be a wise decision, but it means that as we steward our strengths, we must do so from a posture of dependence upon God. We recognize these talents and gifts are from God and can be utilized for ultimate good only in dependence upon Him. The truth is, in the hero's journey, you go from one experience of weakness to another. And as you get stronger and stronger, who gets the glory? God. That's the Christian journey. That's the Christian life. Now, there are a number of characters that often portray this in the Bible as one who goes from one weakness to another as God strengthens them and prepares them for whatever they have ahead, and they become the hero. But there is a character that at times I refer to, King Saul, and he is the perfect example of a hero who doesn't want to take the journey. He's a perfect example of the type of person that says, I want to look the hero, I want to play the hero, I want to act the hero, but I don't want to prove what it takes to be a hero. And actually the way his story starts is in 1 Samuel. And his story starts before he becomes king. And this is how it starts. The people say to Samuel, they say, hey, Samuel, you've been judging us. You've been ruling us for a long time. We don't really like this kind of authority structure. You know what we want? We want a king like all the other kings. Now, what kind of language is that? We want to look good. They look good. They've got kings, and they're pretty special, and they're well respected. We don't have a king. We just got these judges running around. We're not really sure about the power structure, and somehow God's on top. But we don't know. We want a king. A king is clear and is obvious. A guy head and shoulders above the rest. A great warrior. We want a king that looks good for us. When they say we want a king like all the other kings, they're talking about the facade. They're talking about how he looks. And the funny thing is Samuel says, you know what? You got it. You want a king like all the other kings? I'll get you a king like all the other kings. So he goes, God gives them a few signs to help identify their very first king, King Saul, and they recognize that Saul should be king. He is distinguished as one head and shoulders above the rest. And Samuel says, God has chosen you. And then Saul shows up, and for his very first feat, ever before he's truly crowned, though he's recognized, ever before he's crowned, he gathers up the men of Israel, and they go against the Ammonites, and they win. And everyone's thinking, well, we would all think at that point, this guy, head and shoulders, looks the part. He's our king. He's our king. But if you know how God works with people in the Bible, there should be a red flag right away. Because when God shapes and when God works and when God develops a person, he does it over years. But for Saul, it's done within minutes. Between meeting him and crowning him, it's lightning fast. Then with almost luck, he rallies the people, defeats the Ammonites. He appears like lightning, like a one-hit wonder. This stands in sharp contrast to David, who must wait nearly 14 years to become king. Moses, who waits 40 years, probably more. Apostle Paul waits a number of years. Abraham, he's nearly 100 before he has his son. Jesus was 30. All of these men had a journey, a tough journey, a shaping journey. And if you do a quick study, you realize almost no other character in the Bible quickly becomes crowned without some struggle. So what we see right away with Saul, there's something not quite right with this guy. He's not like everyone else. And we like that, right? We like the one-hit wonder, the guy that comes fast, guy that comes quick, and he beats everyone, and he's able to be crowned king. That's very American of us. But the truth is that this king, like all the other kings, this facade will turn out to be a bad king in the end. So as we continue to work through the lives of Saul, really quick, what you should know is that later on, Saul is fighting with the Philistines, and and the army recognizes this is not going well, and so they hide. His soldiers begin to hide in the caves, and they begin to hide in the hills, and some says they even hide down in the wells. They are freaking out because the Philistines are overwhelming them, and Saul's like, man, we've got to rally the troops. Now, when he has this kind of tone of we got to rally the troops, we got to motivate them, that seems like good leadership talk kind of stuff. But in his mind, he is probably thinking what most leaders think. Oh, things are not going well. I'm the head of this army. They're freaking out. They probably think I don't have it together. So I, King Saul, must show that I have it together. So he's waiting for Samuel to show up, who's supposed to give an offering. See, if Samuel gives an offering, then it's like God's on your side. And the soldier's like, yay, God's on our side. Let's go fight that battle. But Samuel's late to give that offering. He's late. And so Saul is like, well, I got to keep these people motivated. So he offers up his own offering to God. Why? It actually says it right there in the passage. My men were scattered everywhere, Samuel. I had to do it. And at that point, God said, you're not the king for Israel. So we already see in the first incident after that defeat with the Ammonites that he is motivated not by what God wants, but how he looks. So that we turn to chapter 14 in 1 Samuel verse 24. And it says, and the men of Israel had been hard pressed that day. So we saw a couple of chapters ago, they were hard pressed then. They were scared. They were freaking out. Things are not going well. Again, we see in chapter 14, the men of Israel are hard pressed that day. So Saul had laid an oath on the people saying, now at this point, what is Saul doing? He's trying to motivate the troops. He's trying to get them focused. He's trying to keep them going in the right direction, but really he's trying to show that that he is in control and he has power. He says, cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. What he says to the soldiers is like, you're not going to eat until you defeat, but it's very important here, and this is where we get the tip, that this is about Saul, not God. Whose enemies does he say? My enemies, Saul's enemies. So the first thing is he puts this oath out there, and he's like, you guys cannot eat until you defeat the enemies. But why? But for whose enemies? My enemies. See, they're my enemies, and I want you guys to be able to take them down. Now, guys, I want you guys to imagine you've already been out there half a day. You've been battling 5-6 hours. You burned 6,000 calories, and your king just said, no tacos for you until you defeat the Philistines. And you look at this man, and you're like, I'm going to hurt you. And so now we have a king who seems to give out rash oaths for their own ego, for their own enemies. It says, so none of the people had tasted food. Now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping. So you're hungry, you've not eaten all day, and here's this honey just coming from the trees onto the ground. But no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. But Jonathan is his son. Jonathan is a warrior. Jonathan is loved by the men. This guy, he is the William Wallace. He's the brave heart of the Israelites army. And so Jonathan walks in, had not heard his father charge the people with the oath, so he put out the tip of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. It's that moment when you're starving, you're hungry, and you haven't eaten all day, and you just take that first bite, and your eyes, there's a sense of your eyes become bright. You get this energy, you get this vitality. And so his eyes were bright. In verse 28, then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, and this is really important because we recognize in the previous chapters, Jonathan is a man after God's own heart. Jonathan is the man you can trust. Jonathan is, we all recognize the guy we all want to get behind. This is what he says about his own dad, the king. My father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. Common sense, if they had food, they could have defeated the Philistines far greater than they had done. So what he's saying is like, this doesn't make sense. Why would you tell people not to eat if they've got to go fight a war? Why? Because Saul was trying to rally his troops, because Saul was trying to look good, because Saul was trying to maintain his power and authority, influence, as Saul always did. Saul wanted to be the hero without the struggle. He wanted to hold on to power without the journey. And so we continue, and I'm going to summarize the next couple of verses, but essentially they go back out in verse 31, and they haven't eaten, and they're starving, and they finally defeat the Philistines at Michmash and Aijalon, and the people were very faint. So it says they're really hungry because of Saul's rash oath. And so now the Philistines are dead, but now they've got all this food just lying around. They got the ox, they got the sheep, they got the whatever. They're like, hey, let's go get those guys. So they go and grab the animals, but they're so hungry and so famished. They kill the animals, but they don't bother to drain the blood. It sounds like they just cooked it partially and then just ate it with the blood still in. If you're a good Israelite, you know Moses said, do not eat meat with blood. So now, because of a bad vow, because of a rash vow, the soldiers have been tempted and forced into what? Into sinning against God, and it's found out. And so over the next couple of verses, they have to make sacrifices for the sin. They have to atone for their sins. But so now, because of Saul's poor leadership, we now have soldiers making bad mistakes. And we get down to verse 40. Then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan, my son, will be on the other side. So now what he does is he says, hey, Israel, I want you guys to go over here. And Jonathan, and actually, I skipped a part of the story. Reverse that. Okay. So what we see after this big defeat, then the next day, Saul's like, should we go down and take on the Philistines again? So what does he do? I mean, he's a good Israelite king who walks up to the priest and says, priest, go ask God if we should go do this again. The priest goes and asks God and pretty much comes back and says, God said nothing to me. Well, that's not good. What are you saying? God is silent? God's not speaking to me? And then Saul gets nervous. And then we get to verse 40, what I was referring to earlier. So now, in verse 40, what Saul says is, someone here has sinned. I don't know who did it. I don't know whose fault. I don't know, who made the mistake, but someone sinned. So what we're going to do is, hey, people of Israel, you're on one side. Me and my son, Jonathan, will be on the other side. And priest, we need you to come and tell us which group has sinned. Someone's a sinner here. We needed to know. So they get out the Urim and the Thummim. It's essentially dice. And if it's the Urim, then it would be one party. It's the Thummim. It would be the other party. So they roll the dice to see who's the sinning party. Well, it's obvious right away that it's not the people of Israel. So they announce to Saul and Jonathan, someone in this little party has sinned. Someone in this little party has made a mistake. So they roll the dice again. And it points to Jonathan. And Saul looks at his son, and it says it down here, verse 43, tell me what you have done. And Jonathan told him, I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. And then he makes this noble statement, here I am, I will die. And Saul said, God do so to me, and more also, you shall surely die, Jonathan. At this point, how many want to fire the king? How many want to dethrone this guy because he has created this vow, this rash oath that has now gotten to the point where his son, he has now said to his son, you are going to be taken out. And part of you, man, you're digging this hole, bro. Stop it. You are on the wrong side of this. And if you feel the same way, then you'll be on the side of Israel because it's exactly how they feel. It says, then the people said to Saul, shall Jonathan die who has worked this great salvation in Israel? God has been using this guy to do amazing things. Clearly, God is on his side. Far from it, as the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day. So not only are they on the right side of the situation, but now Saul has to experience the shame of his entire people turning on him and calling him out and saying, you made the wrong call. And what was Saul trying to do the whole time? Look good. Keep his status. Make sure people know that he's in control. But God has turned the whole thing on him, and now he is the weak one. So the people ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die. And to me, this is one of the saddest moments of Saul's career. The people have to pay off King Saul for King Saul not to kill his own son. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. And what we recognize there is that when a person walks into a situation, when a king walks into a situation and his entire drive is to maintain his authority and status and to look good, what is God going to do with that king? He's going to take him from that power and from that seat of authority, and he is going to demote him down to a place of weakness. We call it the false hero. But when a person walks in and says, I'm to humble myself and I'm to allow God to work with me, to recognize in the places that I'm weak so that he can make me strong, then he takes those people from that weak place and he makes them strong. And when I think about the hero's journey, I think about, it's a thing that's been coming up for me the last couple of days. Two things that I've been thinking about the last couple of days. First is marriage. Some of you guys have heard, someone will come up to you, a single person, and will say, I want to get married. You say, well, why do you want to get married? And they say, I want to be a wife. I want to be a husband. It's an obvious response. Most of us probably said that at some point. But when their statement stops at, I want to be this thing, what are they talking about? The facade, the look, the hero, without the journey. They are saying, I want to look the part. And you recognize that day in, day out, marriage is not about how you look, but it's about the journey you're taking with someone, starting at what? A place of weakness. And in humility, you walk with the other person as God is making you strong. Children, too, is a thing that I've been thinking about the last couple of days because my stepsister adopted. And we were just having conversations about the whole idea of adoption and what that looks like. And in those discussions, what became true is that when someone starts off and says, I want to have children because I want to be a dad or I want to be a mom, it is a mistake. Because what are they doing again? They're saying, I want to look this way, I want to feel this way, I want to have this experience that validates me and makes me look good. But parents, at 2 o'clock in the morning, when you're holding that colicky baby, you think, I don't want to be a dad. I don't want to be a mom. Because identity and how I look doesn't get you there. It doesn't make you the hero. But what was pointed out in my conversation with my stepsister, that the decision that must be made in regard to having children is, do you want to start from a place of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to give all I have to another person? I want to give my resources, my wisdom, my strength, my experience to another person who, by the way, and it is actually my stepmom that pointed this out, by the way, I will love them more than they will ever love me. So I will give all this stuff to them. I will pour myself out to them, and I will not get most of that back. To be a parent is to start from a place of weakness, and it's through that God makes you strong. To be a parent is a journey. To be married is a journey. It's not an identity. It's not a name. It's a road. When we think of King Saul, we think of King Saul as pretty much the worst of us. But then we can turn to King David, and we think of King David as the best of us. He wasn't always perfect, especially in 2 Samuel. He made a lot of poor choices. A lot. You remember every one of them. But notice David early in his career. He was strong. He was powerful. He killed bears. He killed lions. He did a lot of, you would consider, heroic things. But even with all of these abilities, he would always step into a situation and refer to King Saul as his anointed, and he recognizes himself as only a servant. And when you meet someone who you see that they've got some talents and abilities and, they can hold their own, but they walk into an environment and they say, you are above me, I am here to learn, I am here to grow, I'm here to change. You think at some level, come on, Lynn, you think at some level, that's a hero. When you got that guy that walks in and clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, but trying to maintain this power status and hold himself over everyone until an entire army says, dude, you're doing it wrong. That's not a hero. My heart at this moment, and as I was thinking about this over the last couple of days, my heart's really tuned into the next generation, to our students. I'm sure we all can take this message away. But I'll tell you, from the age 13 to 25, by my experience, sometimes we can be knuckleheads. Not calling any of the students in here knuckleheads. I'm just saying theoretically. Sometimes we feel like we've got to walk into a room and prove ourselves capable. And it doesn't help that literally every other movie is now a comic book movie. But we feel like we have to walk into the room to prove that we have what it takes. And I'm going to tell you, if you want to do life well, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. Walk in not saying, I have what it takes. Don't tell me why I'm wrong. I'm right. Walk into the room and say, hey, I've never done this before. I think I've got some talent in this area. Tell me what I need to do. I'll tell you what, guys, people will flock around you and support you and get behind you. People will recognize you not as the knucklehead, but as the hero, as one that's starting from a place of weakness, and God is building them to a place of strength to do something strong and mighty.